So it's now my great pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Nima Mesgarani. He's an associate professor at the Zuckerman Mind-Brain Behavior Institute at Columbia. He received his PhD from the University of Maryland and was a postdoc at the Center for Language and Speech Processing at Johns Hopkins University and the Neurosurgery Department at University of California, San Francisco. And he received the NSF Early Career Award in 2015, Pew Scholar for Innovative Biomedical Research Award in 2016, and the Auditory Neuroscience Young Investigator Award in 2019. And his research has been selected among the top 10 innovations of the year by UNICEF, top 10 breakthroughs by Institute of Physics, and top 10 health innovations by Healthcare Innovation. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Nima Mesgarani to the stage.
All right, thank you very much. Let me go ahead and share my slides. All right, is everything okay with the slides?
Yes.
All right. All right, well, thank you very much, Karen. I'm very excited to have this opportunity to tell you all a little bit about the state of brain-computer interfaces and more specifically about some of the work that we do in our group. So as Karen mentioned, brain-computer interfaces are built on this notion that anything that we think, feel, sense, or do is basically boils down to activity of the neurons in our brain. So then is it possible to directly tap into that activity and read that information directly from the brain, or write new information into the brain? And this sort of technology, this sort of methods can be used to, for example, replace a function, restore, enhance, supplement, or improve. So this is an area that has been very active, and in the past decade almost has gone through some really breakthrough advances. And I'm going to start by just giving you a sense of where this field is now and what are some of the new things that has happened, particularly in the past decade. So one of the first things is the control of a prosthetic arm. And that is something that we're going to hear in the second part of tonight from Nathan. So this has been, one area of research that has received a lot of attention. Here you see, a patient that was implanted on both sides and is able to control two robotic arms simultaneously to perform some complex tasks. This could be done also non-invasively, for example, from a bracelet that records the activity in the muscles. For example, for an amputee. And as you can tell here, after some practice, it's possible, for these people learn how to control the robotic arms really well. It can be, used to, for example, control virtual objects. And in one of the earlier work that was a breakthrough in this field, people have used electrical activity, neural recordings in the brain of a monkey to not only control an avatar, but also fill virtual objects in that virtual world. And I'm sure many of you have seen this recent video from the Neuralink. So this is the company that Elon Musk started in 2017. That what you see here is a monkey that is able to play video games. And what is really interesting in this case is that, unlike the previous cases, there are no cables, there is no device, everything is now integrated. This sort of, reading information from the activity of the muscles, the electrical activity in the muscles can also be used using a wristband, like what you see here, to control virtual objects. So this is an example from a company called Control Lab that is now part of Facebook, which is now Meta. And you can imagine that this sort of technology can be soon used to control objects in a virtual reality space. Now, so this is not only to control, let's say, a movement on an arm, but it can also be used for, for example, messaging and surfing the web. So what you see here are two people who are able to use this sort of devices and these sort of decodings to send messages, surf the web. Another recent advance has come from trying to decode letters, right? So as you imagine writing a letter from the activity of the neurons in the motor cortex, it is possible to decode what the intended letter was. And what was remarkable about this work that just came out very recently is really the speed, which is 90 characters per minute. And if you want to have a sense, Stephen Hawking was able to write 1 or 2 words per minute with with the device that he was using. And the speed that the person types on a cell phone is around 180. So this is already half of that, which is really great. Here is another example where researchers, instead of looking at the hand activity, hand motor cortex, they try to decode words directly from the speech cortex. So this is the person also that is trying to, to try to say something, and then from the activity in the speech cortex, they're able to decode some of the words. All right, so this sort of brain-computer interfaces can also be used to restore sensory functions. One of them, which has been around for a while now, is a visual prosthesis. That you can have a camera that sends information either to the retina or directly to the motor cortex and can restore function to a person who is unable to see. Cochlear implants are probably the most widely used BCI applications that can stimulate the neurons in the cochlear directly for somebody who has lost hair cells. And using that kind of method, they can restore also hearing to somebody who is unable to hear. And finally, one example that I want to mention, which is actually not very new, is pretty old, but this was I think this was one of the first examples of direct brain-to-brain interface. So what you see here, these 2 mice, one of them is seeing a visual cue, and the other one is pressing a lever. And the one that is pressing the lever doesn't see the visual cue. The one that sees the visual cue doesn't have access to the lever. But when their brains are synced, they are able to, to solve this problem together, and both of them are getting food. So this is nice, and if you want to think of the possible futuristic applications of this sort of brain-to-brain interfaces, maybe one day, instead of sending a text to someone, you can send them a thought directly. All right, so now let's talk a little bit more specifically about what we do in our group, which is specifically about speech. So speech communication involves, whenever we have something that we want to tell to another person, we have, we produce a pattern of electrical activity that then moves the muscles in our vocal tract, and that movement produces a vibration in the air, that when it travels and reaches a person's eardrum, it causes a vibration of the eardrum, and that movement is then translated to electrical activity and is interpreted by their brain, and they suddenly know what you wanted to tell, who you are, how you're feeling. All of that information can be directly estimated from the sound. Now, this obviously is could be effortless for many people, but a lot of people are suffering from having disabling hearing loss. The chart that you see here shows the projected number of people with disabling hearing loss. And as you can tell, pretty soon it's going to reach 1 billion. And even now, 1 in 8 people in US have hearing loss, and that raises to 50%. So 1 in 2 in those who are 75 and older. So this is a problem that is going to affect a lot of people, and that's why we are focused on this problem. All right, so here is a very quick summary of what goes on in the brain as we listen to speech. These are the parts of the brain that are involved. From the ear, you have the cochlear that does time frequency analysis, and from there, the signal travels through multiple stops until it reaches the auditory cortex, which is this area right behind your ear. And from there are some other places that are involved. We know, especially because of people who have lost function in some of their brain, and from the kind of deficits that they have, we know something about what sort of areas are involved. Exactly how, it's it's more unclear. We don't know that as much yet. All right, so if you want to study the system, obviously we have to have a way to record from these areas. And the methods that we use in our lab, one of them is invasive recordings. So these are done in collaboration with the hospitals here at Columbia and other places in New York. And these are the patients that are undergoing epilepsy surgery. And as part of their clinical care, they are implanted with these sort of invasive electrodes, which are placed in order to figure out the locus of the epilepsy. But while they are in the hospital and they're connected to a computer, we can go and ask them to participate in our projects, and we can then record from their brain. And with these two methods, the surface electrodes, ECOG, and with these sort of depth electrodes, we are able to access both the primary parts and the secondary parts of the auditory cortex. So let's see what kind of activity do we expect to see as a person is listening to speech. So here's one case. And what you see here is each of those dots represents one electrode. And what you see here, the color change is the change in the voltage as the person is listening to speech. So there's a lot of information there. And one of the scientific goals that we and many others are pursuing is to basically figure out what in the signal, what kind of sounds when are heard are causing this sort of pattern. Why do we have this sort of a spatiotemporal pattern of activity in the brain? And when we talk about the speech communication, what you might consider is something like this, like you're sitting in a nice, quiet place, having a conversation with a friend. But obviously, especially for those of us who live in New York, that is really not the case. And this is more of the scenario that we are faced with every day. So as you're having a conversation with a friend, cars are passing by, you have maybe planes, other people who are around you are speaking at the same time. And, especially in New York, this is a big problem, right? If you look at the noise map in New York City, you can easily see that there is pretty much nowhere that you can find to have a quiet conversation with someone. So we constantly are, surrounded by all these sort of sounds, all these sort of irrelevant noises that we have to filter out. And in our scientific work, one of the things that we have shown is that our brain is able to adapt very quickly whenever the noise changes. So if you're talking to a friend, you're walking from the street to a bar, for example, or a restaurant, as soon as the background changes, it's going to come in and flood your system. And then very quickly you adapt to it. And then you go back to as if it wasn't even present. For many of us, it's a simple thing. But if, for anybody who has a hearing loss, this is already a difficult problem. So one of the goals that we have is to figure out if there is a way to enhance hearing, particularly in background noise. And I wanted to tell you about one case that we had a patient with this sort of depth electrodes. And surprisingly, we discovered that whenever we are stimulating, we are sending electricity to the electrodes that are in a particular part of the brain called the planum temporale. This patient responded that the background noise disappears and all I hear is the voices. And I wanted you to hear that from her own mouth. Let me just play this video.
Okay, now I'm going to count to 10. 1, and just tell me when you feel a change and what it sounds like. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
5. Oh, it's getting stronger.
What did you feel?
I can hear your voice more and more clear.
You use some other description. She's NPO right now, so I don't want you to talk too much because I don't want your mouth to get too dry, but you described it. What's the best way you can describe this in 10 words or less? When
you're listening to music and you're trying to adjust the equalizer, the tone, how you hear the music, easiest way to explain it.
Oh, wow. Would you describe it?
Yeah. So, and this was, something that we also systematically tested. So we gave her a lot of speech in noise materials, and I asked her to report the quality and also the intelligibility by repeating them with and without the stimulation. And we confirmed that it was significantly improved. Like the intelligibility goes from 50% when she was able to hear half of the words to almost 100%. So this is really interesting, and and if you remember the picture that I showed you, this sort of neural activity as we are listening to sound and speech. One question that you might ask, which then connects this to the whole world of brain-computer interfaces, is how much can we say by looking at this activity about what the person actually heard or wanted to hear? And like, is it, for example, possible to do a decoding and map it back to the sound that the person heard? And if that works, it could be, of course, useful for people who are unable to speak, if we can decode their speech directly from their brain. And it also could have applications for people who use hearing aids. One of the problems with the hearing aids currently is that anybody who has them doesn't really use them when they really need them. Because if they go to a crowded place, they amplify everybody, and that doesn't really help the person. So to look at the first problem, how much can we say about what the person heard without knowing what they heard? The easiest thing you can do is to record the neural activity and then find some kind of a relationship between the neural activity and the sound. And if you have a model of that relationship, then we can reconstruct a sound for a new sample. And let me play you an example of what is possible, which was, the first one is based on, a work that I did when I was a graduate student almost a decade ago, more than a decade ago. It probably wasn't very intelligible. And now, with our recent work, when we use more advanced models, this is what we get.
4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
Yeah, so I hope you could tell that these were the digits, and it's much more intelligible now. And one question that you might ask is, but what if you have multiple people talking? And if you reconstruct from someone's head, someone's neural activity, do you see both of the talkers, or do you only see the person that you're attending to, you're focusing on? And if you change your focus, is that going to change? And that's exactly the question that we investigated in a scientific study that we had people listening to talkers alone, and we get, we reconstruct these images from their brain. And when they are listening to the mixed audio, but attending to one at the same time, we only see that talker as if the other speaker is filtered. Now, this could be interesting, right? Like, imagine that you might be in a party and maybe you are paying attention to one person, and this research shows that your brain waves are going up and down, are following with the voice of that person. But if you suddenly start to listen to another conversation, then your brain waves are going to switch and then follow the voice of that other talker. And and if a person has a hearing aid in an environment like this, that is not going to be useful, right? Because there is nothing that the hearing aid can do on other than amplifying everybody without knowing which person you want to listen to and which people you want to eliminate. So that's exactly the idea of this sort of brain-controlled hearing device, that you have a system that automatically separates all the sounds, compares them to the brain, and then chooses the one that is most similar to the brainwave. And by amplifying that person, then it can help the person to hear. Now, you might think that the brain part is a very difficult part of this issue, but it turns out that solving that engineering problem is also extremely difficult. And that is an area that we focused a lot in the past few years, and we've been able to solve this problem by finding better representations of audio that have separation of the talkers. Now, having that, then we can have this sort of idea that you have, imagine a box that we call it AAD, auditory attention decoder, which has two inputs. One of them is the sound in the environment, and the other one is the brainwave of a listener. And inside of this box, it automatically separates the voices, compares them to the brain, and amplifies the one that is most similar to the brainwave of a listener. And I'm going to show you a demo of this system. This is a system that the first part, the listener is trying to focus on the male talker, and that switches to the female. And we turn on the system at 10 seconds, and the switch happens around 25.
How to be a shepherd. Being a shepherd can be a lot of fun, especially when you know how to do it. Shepherds can be found all over the world, any place from the deserts of Israel to the highlands of Scotland.
The breed of
Find
a
a good
dog
place
can
to
have
live.
significant impact on its
Many shepherds
personality,
like to live in
as
mountains.
well as its size,
If you want
health,
to do this,
and
it would
required
be
maintenance.
best to move to Wales or
For
Scotland.
example,
If you
long-haired
want to live in
breeds,
the United
like
States,
collies,
move
may
to
be
Idaho
beautiful,
or
but they
Wyoming.
require frequent
Buy
brushing.
a sheepdog.
If you do not have time
Some
to devote
sheepdogs
to
are better
weekly
than
or even
others.
daily maintenance,
You would do
you may
best to
need
look on a
choose
dog
different
market
breed.
online or see
The
if you can
American
find a breeder.
Eskimo is
All right, yeah. So I hope you could tell that it was much easier to listen to the attended talker when the other person is attenuated. So basically, let me just wrap up by that sort of brain control interface technologies are already around. They are used to repair, restore, and enhance sensory, motor, and cognitive functions. And this sort of brain control hearing devices, they are potentially able to edit the acoustic scene for you, right? So they can eliminate the sources of sound that you don't want and just keep the ones that you want to listen to, which could be extremely useful in noise. I want to just emphasize that this sort of research really requires a multidisciplinary approach, which combines the neuroscience, engineering, and computing sciences, which is really the essence of the Zuckerman Institute and the institute that hosts us. And I just want to acknowledge all the lab members and our funding sources, and I'll be happy to take questions in the discussion. Thank you very much.